Amina's phone vibrated at 6 a.m. One notification, one video, one mistake. Her hands shook as she pressed play. Her own face stared back at her, laughing, reckless, completely unaware of the storm about to hit. Who recorded this? Who sent it? And why is everyone watching it? Her heart pounded, her life, her future hanging by a thread. And the worst part? She had no memory of that night. The gates of Royal Crest College stood tall, shining in the morning sun, a symbol of prestige and excellence. Students in neatly pressed uniforms hurried to their classes, their polished shoes clicking against the marble floors. Some carried books, others whispered in small groups, but when Amina stepped in, all movement seemed to pause. She wasn't just another student, she was breathtaking. Her caramel skin glowed under the sunlight. Her deep, intelligent eyes held a spark that was impossible to ignore. She walked with quiet grace, her posture straight, her confidence effortless. Whispers spread through the halls. Who is she? Is she a new student? She looks like a model. Even teachers turned their heads. Young lecturers adjusted their ties. Older professors cleared their throats as she walked past. And students exchanged glances of admiration and envy. Amina had no idea about the effect she was having. She was here for one thing: to study, excel, and make her family proud. In class, her presence was impossible to ignore. Whenever she raised her hand to answer a question, the teachers seemed eager to call on her. Mr. Adams, the strictest mathematics lecturer who never smiled, suddenly became patient whenever she spoke. Mr. Bello, the literature teacher, often lost track of his lecture when she looked at him. One day, after a difficult test, Mr. Bello returned the papers. He walked through the rows of desks, handing out scripts with little emotion. Until he got to Amina, he hesitated, looking at her, then handed over her paper with a smile. "Excellent work, Amina," he said softly. His fingers brushed against hers briefly, and he held eye contact higher than necessary. Students exchanged knowing glances. Amina simply smiled and thanked him, unaware of how the interaction had been perceived. Among those watching was Vanessa, a girl just as beautiful as Amina, but lacking in intelligence. Vanessa had always been the center of attention until now. The way male teachers smiled at Amina, the way students whispered about her, the way she outshined everyone in class, it was unbearable. Vanessa wasn't one to sit back and accept defeat. One afternoon, she leaned close to Amina during a break. "You are stressing yourself too much," she said sweetly. "You are too pretty to be spending all your time reading. Look around you. The teachers adore you. Use it to your advantage." Amina laughed, shaking her head. "I'd rather pass by working hard." Vanessa smirked. "Suit yourself, but don't come crying when you realize you wasted all your beauty for nothing." Amina dismissed her words, but they lingered in her mind. As time passed, Amina began noticing things she had ignored before. Some teachers smiled a little too warmly at her. Some seemed eager to assist her even when she did not ask for help. Mr. Bello often gave her hints before tests. Mr. Adams became patient with her even when she made mistakes. Then the real test came. A difficult exam was approaching, and Amina found herself exhausted from studying. She thought about Vanessa's words. That day, instead of studying, she put extra effort into her appearance, choosing a fitted uniform, applying light makeup, and practicing her sweetest smile. After that exams, she wasn't happy with what she wrote, so she went to read under the tree. That afternoon, the sun was hot. Amina sat under the tree trying to study, but her mind felt tired. She had been reading for hours, but nothing was making sense. Vanessa walked up to her, holding 2 bottles of cold soda. She smiled and handed one to Amina. "Take this. You need a break." Amina hesitated, then took the bottle. "Thank you. You stress yourself too much." always reading, always serious. It is not good for you. I just want to do well. I get that, but life is easier when you know how to play smart. Not everything has to be hard. Amina did not respond. She stared at her books, but Vanessa's words stayed in her mind. During the next test, she made eye contact with Mr. Bello and subtly smiled. He walked past her desk, glanced at her paper and nodded. A few days later, when the results came out, she had scored higher than expected, and she knew that was the moment everything changed. She started testing the limits, smiling more, making soft comments, allowing her beauty to work in her favor. And it worked. Teachers became more lenient, her grades remained excellent, her books gathered dust. But with each easy success, something inside her felt empty. One evening, after classes, Amina stayed back to read. Vanessa approached her again. "We should celebrate, you know. There is a club in town, just once. Let's enjoy life." Amina hesitated. She had never been to a club, but she was already breaking rules. Why stop now? She dressed up in a way she never had before. Her fitted dress accentuating her figure. Her makeup was flawless, and for the first time, she felt truly untouchable. The club was hot and crowded. Music pounded through the speakers, shaking the floor. Bright lights flashed, making everything look like a dream. The air smelled of sweat, alcohol, and strong perfume. Amina had never felt like this before. The drink in her hand was sweet, but it burned her throat. She had lost count of how many she had taken. Her body felt light, her head dizzy. Laughter bubbled from her lips for no reason. She moved to the dance floor, swaying her hips, throwing her hands in the air. The beat controlled her, and she let it. People cheered. Someone grabbed her hand, spinning her. She laughed, not caring who it was. Heat rushed through her. She pulled off her jacket and tossed it into the crowd. More cheers, people whistled, and then she lifted her dress slightly, teasing, enjoying the attention. Her body felt loose, weightless. Then strong hands grabbed her wrist. She turned, blinking in confusion. A man, maybe a bouncer, stared at her, shaking his head. His grip was firm. Amina's heart pounded. She was scared, but she was enjoying it. Suddenly, the flashing lights felt too bright that her stomach twisted. Then a loud crash. A bottle shattered near the bar. People screamed, pushing, shouting. Chaos filled the club. Sirens, and then police. Students rushed through the back exits. Amina stood frozen, her mind struggling to keep up. Someone grabbed her arm, yelling for her to run. But it was too late. Students fled, slipping through hidden exits. But Amina was frozen in fear. She was caught. Everything happened so fast, and she did not know what to do. At the police station, Amina sat on the cold metal bench, her hands gripping the edge. The place smelled of sweat and stale papers. The air was thick with murmurs from officers and the quiet sobs of a woman in the corner. She had never been in a place like this before. The officers barely looked at her, and they moved around, filing out reports, answering phone calls, and escorting in more people. Some drunk men were arguing in the next cell. A policewoman sat behind the counter, writing something in a big book. Amina's heart pounded. What would her parents say? What would the school do? She wanted to wake up and find out that it was a bad dream, but it was not. Hours passed. The metal door finally creaked open, and when she looked up, her stomach dropped. Her parents stood at the entrance, their faces hard as stone. Behind them, the principal of Royal Crest College stood with a frown, his hands folded behind his back. Her father's eyes were filled with disappointment. Her mother's lips trembled, as if she wanted to cry, but she refused to let the tears fall. The principal simply sighed, shaking his head. An officer approached them. She's lucky. She wasn't involved in the fight, just at the wrong place at the wrong time. He turned to Amina. But next time, young lady, you won't be so lucky. Amina stood up slowly, her legs weak. Her mother turned away without a word. Her father nodded to the officer, signed some papers, and then looked at Amina with a gaze so sharp, it felt like a slap. The walk out of the station was silent. Outside, the night air was cool, but Amina still felt like she couldn't breathe. Her father finally spoke as they reached the car. "We will talk at home." Her mother didn't even look at her. The drive was the longest of her life. The car ride home was silent. Amina sat in the back seat, her hands shaking on her laps. Her father drove without saying a word, his face tight with anger. Her mother sat beside him, staring out of the window, her eyes red from crying. When they reached home, her father stepped out first, slamming the car door so hard that Amina flinched. He walked straight into the house without looking at her. Her mother followed slowly, wiping her eyes. Amina hesitated before going inside, her heart pounded. She had never seen her father this angry before. Inside the house, he was waiting in the living room, his arms crossed, his face dark with disappointment. The air was thick with tension. Her mother stood near the door, silent, her hands gripping her wrapper tightly. The room felt colder than usual. Her father finally spoke, his voice low but heavy. "You have shamed this family, Amina." Amina lowered her head. She wanted to explain, to say something, but the words didn't come. "We worked so hard to send you to the best school. We trusted you, and this is how you repay us? Arrested like a common criminal?" Her mother let out a shaky breath. She wasn't yelling, but that made it worse. "Amina, when did you change? What did we do wrong?" Amina's throat tightened. She wanted to say she was sorry, but she knew sorry wouldn't be enough. Her father shook his head. His voice was filled with anger and pain. "If you get expelled from that school, you will get expelled from this house." Amina's breath caught. She looked at her mother, hoping for mercy, but her mother turned away, her shoulders shaking as she cried. Tears rolled down Amina's cheeks. She wanted to beg, to plead, but she knew it wouldn't change anything. Slowly she walked to her room, her legs feeling weak. She shut the door behind her and sank onto the bed. Her chest tightened as she tried to hold back her sobs. The next morning, sunlight slipped through the curtains. Amina's head pounded, her body felt weak. She lay still, her parents' angry voices from last night still echoed in her mind. She reached for her phone with shaky hands. The moment she turned it on, hundreds of notifications flooded the screen. Her class group chat was buzzing. Messages, missed calls, too many to count. Her heart raced as she opened the chat. "Is this really Amina? Wow, I thought... Oh my God, I never thought she was this kind of girl. So all that innocent behavior was fake. Now wow, some people too do." She scrolled, her hands trembling. Then she saw it. A video. She tapped it. Her own face stared back at her, wild and reckless. She was dancing on a table, laughing, swaying, pulling at her clothes. Her eyes were empty, lost. More comments followed. Shameless. She deserves whatever happens to her next. Amina dropped the phone. Her stomach twisted. She felt sick. She could not eat. She could not move. The thought of going to school made her chest tighten. She wanted to throw up. Everyone knew. Who did this to her? Who recorded her? Her life flashed before her very eyes. The morning sun shone brightly over Royal Crest College. But for Amina, everything felt cold. She stood outside the school gate, hesitating. Just days ago, she had walked in with confidence, turning heads, making teachers smile, making students whisper. But today was different. She took a deep breath and stepped inside. The usual chatter of students filled the air, but as soon as she appeared, the voices dropped. Heads turned, but this time, the looks weren't of admiration. They were filled with judgment, amusement, and gossip. "That is her. I heard she got arrested. She slept with the teachers, didn't she?" Amina felt her legs grow heavy. but she forced herself to keep walking. She spotted a few classmates standing in a group. These were students who used to smile at her. Some even complimented her beauty before. But today, their eyes held something else: disgust, mockery, curiosity. One girl whispered something, and the group burst into laughter. Amina clenched her fist, keeping her face straight. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. As she walked past the staff room, she caught sight of Mr. Bello, the same teacher who used to smile warmly at her, who even praised her for her intelligence. Their eyes met for a brief second. He quickly looked away, pretending to be busy with some papers. The admiration was gone. The special treatment was gone. Amina reached her classroom and pushed the door open. The moment she stepped in, silence fell. Every single pair of eyes turned to her. She walked to her seat, feeling their stares burning into her skin. As she sat down, she heard the giggles, the whispers, the quiet insults. Vanessa sat at her front, her lips curled into a victorious smirk. She leaned towards another student and muttered something. More laughter followed. Amina gritted her teeth and looked straight ahead. That afternoon, she was summoned to the principal's office. The disciplinary board sat before her, their faces stern. "What do you have to say for yourself, Amina?" the principal asked. Her voice trembled. "Sir, I admit I used my beauty for grades, but I never did anything beyond that." And then Vanessa stepped forward. Her voice was cold. "That is a lie. I saw her. She slept with teachers for grade." Amina's blood ran cold. "That is not true." But no one listened. The verdict was swift. Expulsion. Amina cried and packed her belongings. When she got home, her parents were waiting. Her father's voice was like thunder. "We raised you better than this. How could you shame us like this, Amina?" Her mother wept. She tried to explain, but their disappointment was too deep. Her father said nothing else, but her mother pleaded that she should be given a second chance. The next morning, she was sent to a public secondary school, St. Patrick's Government School. Everything was different. The school was old. The classrooms were crowded. The teachers were overworked. There were no special smiles from teachers, no whispers of admiration. And for the first time in a long time, she felt powerless. She thought her life was over. She had lost everything: her reputation, her friends, her comfort. But as she walked towards the gate, something inside her stirred. She still had one thing that no one could take away: her intelligence. And if she wanted to rise again, she had to earn it. No shortcuts, no tricks. This was not the end. This was just the beginning of Amina's story.